Need a presenter? Your Event Audio has you covered. Closed circuit audio equipment with turnkey operation at your trade show booth, live event, or private event. YourEventAudio.com is the place to go. DJ services, MC talent, and a whole lot more. Check out YourEventAudio.com today.
Hope you're having a great week here in mid-April as we get ready for this April 19th version of Exhibitor Now podcast. I'm Mike Morris, the National Sales Director for WS Display and co-host of the show. As you see there, if you're watching, Kim Gischler joins us now as the Chief Content Strategist for Exhibitor Group and Associate Publisher for Exhibitor Magazine. A lot going on these days. We'll jump right into the bullet points and talk about a subject we've been talking a lot about, but not only us, Kim, it's across the board. Everybody is centered on AI and AR and VR and all the other acronyms of all the augmented and technology that's going on out there. There was a story from this morning that a couple of them actually. I'm sitting here having my coffee and doing the morning thing, and I saw a story about a furniture designer, and there's one guy who's sitting there with controllers like it's Xbox, right? And he's sitting there and he's designing furniture in his company. Problem is, there's about 20 designers that lost their job, because now he's the only one that has to do it because he's exponentially speeding up the process through the technology. But we have now unemployed people we have to worry about going back in the ecosystem and finding jobs. A little concerning there. Skip to the next one. Most recently, we talked about in a recent show about AI deep fakes and the big concern about how great this technology is that somebody can take an image and a vocal, an audio track, put them together and make it sound very, very real. And I was watching this example and I'm like, that looks so real to me. I would never be able to tell the difference. I'm concerned about AI and AR for those reasons. Do you have any thoughts on that?
And I think the other one is that it's a scam going on where if you you answer the phone and you say yes or something on you, they can track your voice or whatever, and so then you're getting to some fraud on a different level, getting extra. It's a concern, and I think for us not to be worried about the security behind it or the really asking those extra questions to verify everything. We were so loosey-goosey with a lot of the stuff that we've done in the past, maybe with our passwords or anything else. I think we now have to be a little bit more diligent in doing those 3 or 4 or 5 different verifications, which is a pain. But, there's pros and cons to everything. So there's always a lot of pros that go along with AI. I mean, where it makes you can research things faster, you can change things up, you can make sure that you're saying the right thing the right way. But it's a wait and see. I don't even know what else to say to that one, because it's a big concern on a lot of different levels. There's a lot of not really comfortable with it yet. But more to come. I think it's a conversation, as I said, in the future, as we get down the road here, we're going to have some really great conversations about this in the future. So
my daughter just turned 27 this week. She's a school teacher, and she's in this habit of every time she gets an email, she sends it to me and says, "Is this legit?" And now she's become so questionable about everything that comes her way, phone call, email, because there is this sense of concern.
And if worse comes to worse, just delete it.
Exactly. But you got to be concerned, and you got to be
proactive.
Diligent.
Yes.
Got to be diligent in what you do in this industry specifically. So it'll be a wait and see type of thing. An interesting discussion also in the media this week involving Nike. Everybody knows about the sportswear company, shoe company. And their most recent CEO's perspective that their design innovation as of late has been thwarted by and from remote work. That's an interesting thought, because there are designers that design the top of the line, new trendy type of clothes and shoes. And now they've gone into a bit of a step back in their progression in their mind, and maybe the consumer's mind. And they're blaming it on remote work. But I don't think it's going to change, because the generations as we've discussed, the new generation is pretty much demanding at least a portion of their time to be spent working remotely as opposed to going back to the office.
I think there's certain jobs where you actually get more creative when you are face to face when you are sharing those, and you get the juices flowing, so to speak, and you start having these conversations. We found that face to face events, you get more done when you're face to face sometimes. I think there's no reason you can have the younger generation could have like a, I don't want to say break even, compromise, so to speak, but that
Negotiable.
if you come in there and, have a half day discussion with everyone or do a day, I think you're going to have to find some compromise. I just think sometimes we've found it in everything we do. You get together, the ideas start flowing, they start coming together. It saves so much time sometimes. And I think we're just going to have to be open to a lot of different learning areas. And people need to just take a break sometimes on their thoughts. Try out new things, can't hurt.
There's a segment of people in our industry, and I've seen it at our association meetings, that say, you can't do this industry remote. You've got to be collaborative in person. And then there's this whole another generation that's coming up that's saying, watch me. And
Well,
the two
look,
are going to have to
I've been
collide.
remote. I've worked remote for 25 years.
So
And I've never had a problem. So if you want to call me into the office, I'll come into the office and come in and say hi, and we have meetings and we can do what we need to do. But I get more done working from home. So I will always be the work from home person.
unless you're at the airport, which carries us to our last bullet point. Interesting statement just made by the airlines. We talk a lot about travel here because a lot of us do travel, whether you're setting up booths or whether you're going to see clients or doing shows. This upcoming summer quarter, the experts are saying that the airlines could break all-time travel records between the new business uptick of travel and the international demand and basically leisure travel coming together and saying, we're going to fly. And the records are showing that that's beginning to set trending records of all time. That's a concern, price-wise and traffic-wise. You're already having to go to the airport 3 hours early. You're already having to pay outlandish Uber and Lyft fees to get there. If you are parking there, those are high as well. And then the lines, thank God, I'm a digital ID, clear, and TS pre-check because I can scoot through, but even sometimes those lines are a little bit crazy. It's going to get a little challenging here this summer for business travel. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, plan.
Drive a bus.
I mean, it is what it is. We have to travel. We have to do what we have to do. But I just think you just make it, how about just don't make those connections as tight as they can be, and you're not going to be disappointed. So it's, you're, again, planning is huge. And if you got to travel, you have to travel, but, be smart about it or get extra work done while you're doing it. So I have no comment on, I mean, we have to travel. So it is what it is.
3 of the top things that are affecting our industry right now that make it interesting, at least at minimum, it's interesting to talk about and see what's going on.
Yeah.
Another subject in our industry, a lot, especially with corporations and shows and association events, is that keynote speaker. Who are you going to get to talk at the beginning of an event or at an important point in the event that you want to disseminate the right information? So we've got a gentleman by the name of Rich Gibbons, who Kim knows very well and has known for, I'll say
a few years.
A few years. That's right. Few, with the emphasis on the word few.
Yeah,
years.
few years.
Few years. And man, what a great interview. You're really going to enjoy this one, especially if you're in that mode of you have to hire the speaker. One of the questions you're asking, what are you looking for? Do you get this type of expert to help you with? It was very educational. I hope you want to stand by and listen to this interview with Rich Gibbons here on the Exhibitor Now podcast. It comes up next after this.
Attention, trade show and event marketing professionals. Are you ready to take your face-to-face marketing expertise to the next level? Join more than 3,000 candidates currently enrolled in Exhibitor Group's Certified Trade Show Marketer Program. CTSM is corporate America's top source of the industry's best trade show and corporate event training. CTSM certified trade show marketers enjoy expanded career opportunities, greater respect and authority in their organizations, and earn higher salaries than their acronym-free peers. Learn more, earn more. Visit ctsm.com today.
Welcome back to the Exhibitor Now podcast. As we mentioned on the close of the front end of the show, speaking at events is a big part of our event ecosystem. Having the best keynote speaker, having a great speaker who can disseminate very important information that ties your organization or your event together is very important. And trying to do that matchmaking process is extremely important. So you may be wondering, who are the people that make that magic happen? We're going to meet one of them today on the Exhibitor Now podcast. I'll turn things over to Kim and have this great interview with Rich Gibbons.
Well, thank you, Mike. Very nice to see you again. And Rich Gibbons, president of SpeakInc. So lovely to see you.
Same likewise.
It has been a while, but
It's
I'm
been
glad
a minute or two.
Well, I've got to call up some friends and say, come on, let's talk.
Oh, honored to be invited.
Well, it's great to see you. And so for those that are in some crazy planet that don't know who you are, can you give a quick little background, little overview of what Rich Gibbons is all about?
Yeah. I joined this industry, the Speakers Bureau industry, helping pros like yourself and lots of different industries, lots of different kinds of events. But our bureau and the bureau industry helps stakeholders and people who are creating programs identify the voices, the personalities that they're putting on the platform. And I started 33 years ago, and I must like it because the industry is endlessly fascinating and super fun because I get to work with people like you.
And I would love to know, so because of the industry we're in, the event marketing industry or the events industry, but corporate events, you've talked to a lot of different people in the background there. So how is SpeakInc, because I've used you for years, big fan. How is SpeakInc different than those other speaker bureaus that are out there? Because there's a lot to choose from, and I would love to know your perspective on how that is.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but for the uninitiated who don't really know what's going on behind the curtain on our side of the business, you can sort of divide the bureau and agency community up into two different buckets. The first bucket is who's handling Barack Obama and Peyton Manning, and fill in the blank on who the athlete, the movie star, the former politician. That is a large ecosystem, and there are a number of different companies and agencies and bureaus that handle exclusively. They have a roster in the back room, and they've got to essentially get gigs for those people. They are actively marketing them, and of course, they're serving as that talent's front office. Your question was, how are we different? And this is certainly not unique to our company, but the other side of the bureau community sits on the same side of the desk essentially as the event marketer, the event pro, and has a really granular understanding of the profile and demographic of the audience, the theme, the industry. Are you looking for some kind of diversity? All of those parameters, and then can go out to market and say, well, based on all of the detail that the event team has furnished, we would suggest these 3, 4, 5 people that are not necessarily exclusive with us, but these are probably the best people for the job given what you've shared. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but that would be probably, I would say, the single most the number of sort of misimpressions I get from people who don't know the industry. They say things like, well, who you got? And that's not how we work. We don't have 15 names in the back room we've got to find events for.
So I'm a new person. I've just been asked that I have to do the conference keynote. Never done it before. Call you up. Someone's referred me to you, your company. What is some of that advice preparation would you ask them before we even go down the road of researching speakers?
So yeah, that's a very good question. And I would say, sort of like in that the movie where John Travolta looks across the desk and he says to these two crooks, "Am I talking to you, or am I talking to you?" So you need to know, to whom are you offering this service? Who's sort of
Your audience.
who is your audience, but then who are your executive stakeholders whose fingerprints are going to ultimately be on the decision, right? So that would probably be the first thing, and then really getting clarity around the resources, the profile, the demographic of person that you're searching for, because if you're loose and ethereal about, like, oh, we're just looking for ideas, and then you find out, no, we absolutely positively have to have a woman, we absolutely positively have to have racial diversity, we can't go a nickel over $30,000, like, these are really, really important things. So starting without that, one of my favorite expressions is prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. So if you're prescribing ideas that where you don't have that diagnosis of how much money are we working with and what are we looking for, that's kind of that's a bit of a fool's errand.
Well, and I also say is that, and what you were so great at in helping me, or maybe I was just so wonderful in working with,
That that
you that you bring to the table not your normal, I shouldn't say normal, not known as well-known speakers. So a lot of these opportunities for these speakers that maybe have just started out, but they're talking about these new topics that we need to address that might be amazing subject experts that we don't know about. But so instead of getting this, $50,000 keynote, which is, he could be great. I'm sure they are great, whatever. But you could find someone that's between the 3 to 10,000 range that's probably just as impactful and gets across. And then you're launching them. So how do you? What advice would you give the person that you have that lower range, person that's just speaking, coming out, but how do you tell them to sell it to the upper management that they're just as valuable as a Richard Branson or someone like that?
Yeah, well, ultimately, I think one of the most important takeaways that I see from the market is, and I'm oversimplifying here, but if you divide the world of audiences into sort of trade groups and societies, and where attendance at the event is elective, there are a lot of corporate groups where attendance is not elective. Like, we're having the marketing conference, we're having the sales summit, is basically show up or you're fired. It's not quite that austere, but we see a lot of instances like that where attendance for the audience is non-elective, and then the execs want to spend a lot of money on a splashy celebrity sizzle name. It's sort of pearls before swine. You don't need that level of celebrity, and it can sometimes work against you if the celebrity is a household name. Everybody comes into the start of the session thinking, oh, by the end of this keynote, I'm going to be better looking and an inch taller, and the world's going to be grand. Of course, those are very outsized expectations. I'm being tongue in cheek, but when you're talking about that, I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but you're talking about that no name, whose thought leadership, whose ability to articulate their ideas, they have incredibly compelling content that helps people move their practice, their thinking, their lives forward. But the expectation on the front end is a little opaque. Like, who is this? Like, what are they talking? But when they deliver this incredible message that people can use immediately, it kind of blows everybody away. And oh, by the way, they're 1/4 of the price of that luminary household name. So everybody's happy.
Right. And I would also say I've never been disappointed when I've gotten those. They're still friends of mine. I'm not friend, but we still connect with each other. There's just they're considered contacts for the rest of my life. I think they've just been wonderful, and that's a thank you to you. Or they're worried that I'm going to come find them someday and ask them for a favor. That's what they're worried about. But I probably will. So you've gotten your speaker, you've decided those 5, you've looked at all those 5, you've picked one out, or you've picked a couple out. They've agreed on the price. We're all good. What are the next steps? So kind of, can you walk us through kind of, if you're the event manager, you're handling all this, you've signed a dotted line. Now the fun begins. So can you say, in a perfect world, what should happen?
Yeah, so in a perfect world, what should happen is, first of all, the agreement needs to be written with guardrails and sort of surety around, like, I'll give you, for instance, we had a celebrity-ish, a lot of people wouldn't know this speaker's name, but based in New York City, delivering a program here in California, and we had attempted to put guardrails, contractual stipulations on on-site arrival, and the manager said, that we're not going to agree to that, essentially. You have to try to bake these things into the agreement, because as personalities kind of move up the food chain, they become slightly more high maintenance to deal with. And the story I was going to tell you is the 8 a.m. keynote on a Wednesday. My customer and I had a little bit of a heart attack when we heard that their flight was landing at 11:38 p.m. the night before, and they were connecting through Chicago in January. It's like, you're one snowflake away from them not making it, right? So the answer to your question, okay, you've selected the speaker. You need to sort of pause in that moment and say, do we need the speaker to sign books? Are they an athlete? Is the board going to want signed footballs? Do you want them to arrive at a certain time at the meeting site? All of these things are crucially important to think about, and essentially allows us to negotiate on your behalf to say, hey, here's whatever the fee is on the barrelhead, and here are the 7, 8, 9 different provisions you need to agree to if you want that bag of money, right? And that negotiation, 3 days, 3 months, 3 days, weeks, or months later, that ship sailed. The manager's just going to say, no, they're not going to do that, right? But if you bake it all in at the front end, so that's the first step of what do you do now?
Right.
The second step is in advance, that pre-event meeting, and that typically takes place 3-4 weeks in advance of the program. And that's the point at which event owners, people like yourself, can educate and guide the talent around what does that audience do Monday through Friday? What keeps them awake at night? How could how could their thinking be changed? What tools could you put in their back pocket to make them more effective? What hot buttons are there? What do they like to hear about, not like to hear about? That's where the coaching is pivotally important to prep them properly.
And I think we were very successful in those discussions by saying, I know one of the hot buttons we had is that don't ever say that these people are planners.
Party planners.
Party planners. Don't address them as party planners. The other one was, that is also the opportunity where you, as the event person, can go in and say, hey, look, we do a welcoming reception, say the night before. An example I'm giving this audience. We would love, this is a great way for you to introduce yourself to some of the people, get some ideas, and maybe you get some nuggets on what to say for your keynote the next day. Because you're in that, I found, and maybe you can comment on this, I found it to be, they were very appreciative, and it helped them understand the audience a little bit better, and they could bring those nuggets into the keynote the next day. Would you agree to that and say that was helpful for them?
Yeah, and sometimes what you're describing, it is adjunct to the keynote practice. Mm-hmm. But what it shows is when the personality, when that platform personality is really leaning into their tradecraft, they make that kind of effort. And we know who those people are. We know those who phone it in,
Yeah.
and we know those that go to that reception, they meet someone in the gym, and then you hear them on the platform the following morning, like, hey, I was talking with Stacy yesterday morning and she told me a story. And people are sort of touched that, oh, wow, you're referencing a conversation I had with you. But like, oh, talking to Stacy, I know Stacy. It makes it so much more human, as opposed to what can sometimes feel like the Ken doll. Remember the
Yeah.
the doll, you pulled the string out of their back and they talk, and there really wasn't any sort of humanizing component of their interaction with the audience. So absolutely, anytime an event owner has that ability to say, hey, we'd love you to meet our folks, attend a reception, a dinner, whatever it may be, you're not always going to get them to say yes. And the likelihood of that goes down the higher up the sort of celebrity vibe is. But that's really where a bureau can come in and say, hey, I was just at an event with this personality, and they came in early, they met people, they baked that interaction with your audience into their keynote and made it so much more relevant.
Okay, we've gone through, we've chatted everything, we're on site. We kind of touched on this a little bit about the going into, the night before or whatever, but how does the event person running all this manage on site? So you've got the speaker, they've met, hopefully they're doing a walkthrough rehearsal. Hopefully. Or they just stand up on stage, they talk to the AV people and they're like, we're good, we're doing a sound check, we can move off. Things to look out for, things to worry about if you're that person. Is it, everyone, over the years, I just learned the speaker knows what the speaker knows, and I just let it happen. Whatever they want to have happen, they rehearse how they rehearse. They want to come in the night before, or they can come in 5 minutes before the event starts. Any advice for not to worry, or when you should worry, I should say?
Yeah, no, because to some degree, if a speaker is getting paid, any amount of money, and some of them, as you well know, get paid a lot of money,
Yes.
it is self-serving for them to ensure that they have a seamless connection and coordination with the AV crew, that they do a tech check walkthrough. They're not going to, sometimes we have customers that have a little bit of an overzealous approach to, oh, we have an hour for you to run through your whole program or rehearsal. Like, that's not really how it works, because they know their content cold. But making sure that all of that, the PowerPoint, I mean, the thing that we see a lot is is the PowerPoint being driven off their MacBook or a thumb drive, or has it been uploaded to the cloud beforehand? That stuff's got to be wired tight, because if the platforms change, you're going from one piece of software to another, and the fonts get all screwed up, and then that obviously disappoints the speaker. And I have a manufacturing customer whose anonymity I'll protect, but they have cybersecurity paranoia, which is probably well earned these days. They won't touch an external drive, an external computer, a thumb drive, nothing. So you have to make sure that's coordinated. That's usually handled in that prep conversation.
That's, that goes in a whole nother, set up everything ahead of time in those contracts, because that is your way of making sure everything's tight in the process.
Right.
So,
and one other thing I'll mention is bureaus, for the most part, know that you're chasing after executives and volunteer leaders and saying, hey, I really need your session. I really need this deliverable. I really need you to give me this thing. And because they're distracted and busy and mañana, you don't get it until 3, 4, 5 days in advance, maybe a week in advance if you're lucky.
If
right. So we treat that sort of 2-week window leading up to, if something can be done 3, 4 weeks in advance of a program, it should be. And if it's ends up being 3-4 days in advance, that is kind of the red zone. Usually the event stakeholders' hair is on fire because they're dealing with the late deliverable problem.
Right.
So we try to stay out of that zone and make sure all this stuff is wired tight 3-4 weeks in advance.
So I'm going to skip here to promotion because everyone always does such a great job doing front end promotion. Post is always this kind of airy fairy kind of thing because you really should follow up. I mean, if it's in the best interest of the speaker, the keynoter, to follow up with the audience and say, give a message, or for you to follow up with them. Can you give us some examples on what's really worked well, if you can remember anything? I know you're doing this like left and right all the time, but there's some people that always forget the back end of everything. They forget after it's done, how you can still continue that conversation. What has worked well in your experience for that to happen?
So couple thoughts on that. Number one, it's you remember 10 minutes ago when we were talking about when you go into the agreement, you're like, okay, what do we want? What do we need? And one of those items, maybe 12 signed footballs. It may be, well, hey, we need you at the VIP breakfast before your keynote. Whatever that is, one of them can be, hey, we want to be able to use clips of your keynote for web promotion or an email marketing campaign. We want you to deliver an article in the 30 days following that we can share. I mean, a lot of that stuff is frankly off the shelf. It's stuff they've already got in the can. But one thing that I've seen that's been really effective, and obviously it's a little bit more sort of the author, the consultant, that thought leader who's got really robust content. What will oftentimes happen is if a view of the world is shared with the audience and you give them a few hours, a few days, a few weeks to incubate that idea and put it into practice, inevitably whether it's 2, 3, 4 weeks later, like, gosh, if I had access to that speaker, this is what I would want to ask them. And sometimes if you throw the lawn dart out on the calendar and say, hey, we're going to have a Zoom Chalk Talk Q&A office hours session with the speaker, the audience members will come prepped with like, oh, I can't wait to connect with that. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. But in terms of follow-up, that can be a very useful tool that event marketers and event owners can leverage.
So I have, I've been asking this question to some of the other people as we've been doing these podcasts, and I find it interesting because what would you, did you always know that you would be doing this career path?
I'm humbled that you would ask that question. And when people say, hey, Gibbons, what did you major in college? I almost can't tell them because it has nothing to do with what I'm doing now. And so the short answer is no, I never would have anticipated. But I think what makes this, I feel so fortunate to operate in this landscape, because one of my business partners says, it's like going to university every day. You're meeting the most interesting people.
That's why I love events. Yeah.
The fabric of your work is just endlessly interesting. So no, I had no idea, but when I learned of the industry and I was so immersed in certain types of books, and back when dinosaurs were roaming the land, you had these big albums of audio cassettes and VHS tapes, and I had so much of this stuff in my orbit, and I was in a completely different vocation. And then when I learned, like, wow, you can swim in this kiddie pool of content and make a living at it, like, holy moly, that sounds like a ball. And it's been a ball for over 3 decades now. I love it.
Well, you are loved in the industry, and we are so appreciative I am appreciative of your friendship and what you've taught me over the years. So I think we've taught each other. We've put up with each other.
Absolutely.
And I highly recommend, anyone who's listening to connect with you, because you do understand the event marketing side of the business. You do speaking. You've kind of got thrown into it via, it was I forget which summit was, but you were like, "Who are you? What are you doing?" to me, and you got thrown into it, but you knew of it. You knew of this industry, but you hadn't got into it that much. So we are very thankful. Mike, do you have any questions for Rich, or do you have any comments or anything that you would like to share?
It's funny that Kim asked you that question, that canned question that she's always asked the other guests from the past. I think that's a good question. Mine, I kind of sometimes follow up with is, because our listeners and viewers might be interested. Can you tell me that one time that everything just totally went south and
I was going to bring that up, but I just didn't know if he wanted to go there.
Because everybody wants the worst, so they know how to avoid it. That's my motivation of asking the question. When can you tell, kind of summarizing that one time that you did everything right, but it all went down?
Oh man, I will spare you guys the granular detail, but I went to an event in Las Vegas for a high-tech company who really wanted a certain type of stand-up comedian, and we had written the agreement such that there would be no essentially no offensive content around sexual orientation or race. Like, really had this comedian kind of buttoned down, and I was at the back of the room, and it took a couple of strange turns, and the comedian in question just decided, you know what, forget all those provisions, and just went about as blue as you can imagine. And I was at the back of the room, and I wasn't in hell, but I could see hell from where I was.
Well, you can't do anything about it because you're stuck. You can't, like, the giant hook can't get off the stage. So
I heard one of my customers told me last week about a speaker he had booked in a previous life, and said he wanted the shepherd's crook. He wanted to pull the mic, pull the fire alarm is what he said. He said that the speaker in question was doing sort of positive case studies and negative case studies, and in the middle of a just excoriating case study about how bad to do it, how badly this was done by this company, and kind of laughing at the company, my customer was at the back of the room, realizing that the company that was being sort of pilloried and made fun of was their chief sponsor. He seriously, I looked at the fire alarm. I want to just go over it and pull it.
There went the money.
So, I mean, anybody who's been in events for more than 5 or 10 minutes has a horror story.
We all have horror stories.
And that's why I ask. It's funny with I did a stand-up gig Monday night. I do comedy. I'm sitting here editing it into my sizzle reel, and I could see that's a very touchy danger zone of getting comedy involved in as a keynote, because you're right. Somebody's going to be offended in many cases.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then the killer, I'm having PTSD right now as I'm thinking of it. You're like dusting off all these old neurons.
Sorry.
But what the killer, and Mike, if you're in the comedy realm, you know that rule. It sounds like a fairly universal rule. There's two main things in comedy that we've learned over the years. Is number one, people laugh more freely under the cloak of anonymity. So if house lights are down and there's some humor there's a line that is advanced that you find funny, but it might not be socially acceptable in this group to laugh at it. And that audience in particular, house lights were up, and then there was 2 generations. There were knucklehead, like frat brothers on one side of the room, and then the senior leadership, which is like Thurston Howell with his arms folded, butter doesn't melt in his mouth. And when the fraternity brothers, who thought this comedian was absolutely hysterical, looked over and they were busting a gut, and they look over, oh. And then they put themselves on a gag order because they thought, well, I can't laugh in front of that guy because he's clearly pissed. It was a nightmare, absolute nightmare. Thanks for helping me relive it.
I learned my comedy, and I'll be quiet after this. My comedy centric is I make fun of myself. When you make fun of yourself, then you put yourself as the butt of the joke, and then everybody laughs at you, and nobody's offended for the most part. Unless they can relate, and then they're like, "Oh, you are talking about me." So
that's Tom Cotter, by the way. That's his approach too.
Yeah, I find that very helpful. There's a great discussion. I didn't realize, Kim, that finding a speaker was so detailed and so crazy.
Well, and he's making a lot more simplistic than it is. It's you have to come to him, to Rich, or to anyone you do use. You need to have your act together, and you need to do some soul searching and fact finding before you even have the discussion with him, because he's gonna go through the ringer with you, and you really have to know your audience. So I would say that's probably the biggest advice that anyone can give to any person starting out, is that whoever is speaking in front of that audience, you have to know who those attendees are, the demographics, the key issues that they have, and to your point, the key points that you want to stay away from and can't touch on. And you don't want to offend anyone in there. So there's a lot of variables that have to go into it before you even start those discussions. I have never had a issue with who he has brought to the table. The only challenge we've ever had was, will they be available? Because usually I would start too late. And can they do that extra, come in a little extra early? Because to the Rich's point, you don't have them fly through Denver or Chicago in the middle of winter. Yeah. So you just have to know those simple things that we've all been burned. I have not been burned as much as Rich has, but he's been saving me from those.
Well, anyway. I mean, if you spend 52 weeks a year, 365 in the kitchen, you're probably going to burn your hand on a frying pan or cut your finger every now and again. It's just the nature of the beast. But one thing I wanted to mention quickly, Kim, is it always makes me smile when you're unpacking all of those details that you just touched on, and you say, gosh, as you're describing this and describing your audience and the theme and the sort of the overarching North Star here, ideas are germinating in my head, but I don't want to be suggesting candidates that are twice what your budget is. What do you?
No, you need to come in. You need to come in and say,
let's not worry about budget. Let's not go, well, I'm thinking about this person, and this is, her background, and she was a successful entrepreneur. It's like, sounds great. Yeah. Well, she's $75,000 plus a $5,000 travel buyout. Like, whoa. We probably can't spend over $30,000. Like, you should have told me that at the beginning.
You don't want to waste anyone's time. And exactly, I think that's the key. And the budget is key. You need to know budget, and you need to know the audience. And you get those. So if you want 2 speakers and you only have a budget of $30,000, well, then you need to expand your horizons on what you're going to choose from. And and I will go back to my first comment is that just because they might be on the inexpensive side does not mean they lack quality, skill, and expertise in that subject. So give them a heartfelt nod and check them out, because they're worth it, and you're going to instill that loyalty in the future. So with that being said, we will put your information of how to contact you in this. And I can't thank you enough for joining me today. We appreciate you so much, and I look forward to seeing what fun things you have in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate being included, and it was great talking.
Great discussion with Rich Gibbons here on the Exhibitor Now podcast. Quick break, come back and wrap things up right after this.
Are you searching for trade show and event products and services? Find it on Exhibitor Exchange is your complete buyer's guide to trade show exhibiting and events, featuring the trade show industry's top exhibit and display providers.
Find It on Exhibitor Exchange is the industry's best shopping and commerce resource for buyers and sellers of exhibit and event products and services. Reaching 20,000 exhibit and event buyers in every print issue of Exhibitor magazine and 140,000 exhibit and event buyers online each year. Search the listings or list your company today. Learn more at exhibitoronline.com/findit.
Well, welcome back. I think we've learned some great details about how to handle speakers and what to look for. And I can't thank Rich Gibbons enough, the president of SpeakInc, for sharing his amazing knowledge today. And hopefully you learned a few things, Mike, and what we all go through on the event side and trying to deal with that. So there you go.
The big thing is he's correct. Comedy and the combination as a keynote speaker can be very touch and go, and
Right.
you have to be very careful. I would probably say you need to survey your audience on the front end to the T as to exactly what you can and can't say, what you can say and not be offensive.
If you want to go down that path, yes.
Yeah. Otherwise, stay informational
It
and
might just be better
educational.
not to do it. Yeah.
Correct. Save the comedy for the nightclub.
Exactly. Exactly.
But that's an interesting analogy he gave. The
Yeah.
nightmare. So let's talk a little bit about some of the updates with Exhibitor Group before we close things out today. Kim, maybe you could tell us some of the latest.
Yeah, we're still, Exhibitor Education Week is going to happen in July 14th. So hopefully everyone can think about attending some of those CTSM classes. And there's a lot going on there. Obviously, we're planning on EL 25, or Exhibitor Live 25, I should say, an internal acronym for me. And other than that, I mean, gosh, we're just working on processes, trying to clean everything up, making things better for the end user, and more to come. But it's all good, and we're looking forward to a summer.
Wrapping things up, once again, we've mentioned it a couple of times. Emily Olson, the editor of Exhibitor Magazine, and I and David Dubois will all be in Washington, D.C. on Legislative Action Day. As a matter of fact, Exhibitor Group is one of 4 sponsors for that day. So make sure that you drop by if you're going to D.C. and be on the Hill. We'll have a table there set up, a booth where Emily and I and David will be interviewing folks and getting their perspectives about what the legislative action type of things are, to discuss. Man, I tell you, it's going to be a little tough. It's an election year. Right now, let's be frank, a lot of things are happening in DC that aren't comfortable, for lack of better words. And so going up there on the Hill at this time to try to advocate for our industry, might be a little different, but then again, probably the same thing as always. We go in there, we tell our story, and then we talk to people about what they talked about. And so looking forward to that. It's coming up in just a few weeks.
Yep.
Anything else to wrap it up before we?
Nope, I think we're good to go. So thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Absolutely. From the Exhibitor Now podcast.